Hello everyone. So today we're going to talk about the digestive system. So digestive system consists of alimentary canal and number of accessory exocrine glands and um, that are going to help with the digestion. So in general biology, animals are described as organisms who have a tube inside a tube. So this is your sorry. So this is your tube, and then there's another tube on the outside. We as humans, we are a little bit more complicated than that. So we have this tube that's going to start from the mouth and go all the way to the anus. Now this tube, it's going to be expanded at some places, so right here, and it's going to be narrow at some places. And in addition to that, you're going to have your accessory structures such as a gallbladder and liver and pancreas that are going to release these enzymes or these chemicals that are going to help digest the food. So some components of the digestive system. So you have your oral cavity, your mouth, and you put your food in your mouth and goes through your pharynx. Again, you have the nasal, oral, and laryngeal pharynx and goes and enters the esophagus, which is located behind the trachea. So this is posterior to trachea, and then goes all the way where it's expanded. Again, the tube is expanded here, stomach, into the small intestine and then large intestine. Your large intestine is actually shorter than your small intestine, so I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And then your accessory organs are your salivary glands and your liver, gallbladder that's going to store the bile, and pancreas. Okay, so to this slide, what this is showing you name of the division or of different part of the digestive tract, and it's telling you the function of that digestive subdivision. Okay, so your oral cavity, you have your teeth there that's going to break the food mechanically. In addition to that, you also have salivary glands that are going to lubricate or moisten your food. So if you were eating chips, those are really sharp and they could cut inside of your mouth. But then you have these salivary glands that are going to release saliva and that's going to moisten your chips or whatever you're eating so it doesn't really, cut you inside. Then you have your pharynx, and food is going to propel through the pharynx into the esophagus. Esophagus is going to transport food from the pharynx to the stomach. In stomach, you have a lot of enzymes that are going to be released. It's going to chemically break down the food. From the stomach, it's going to move into the small intestine, and your small intestine is divided into different parts. So you have the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. Those are different parts of the small intestine. It's going to come up on a slide. And from there, it's going to move into large intestine. So I said there are different parts of the small intestine. So food that we put into our mouth is broken apart into simple nutrients. And first segment of the small intestine is called duodenum, and that's where most of our digestion is going to happen. Most of the absorption happens in the second and third segment of the small intestine, so jejunum and ileum. And your liver is going to secrete the bile, and gallbladder is going to store the bile, and pancreas, which is your endocrine and exocrine both. So this pancreas is exocrine gland and also endocrine gland. It's going to release some pancreatic juices. So functions of the system: ingestion is taking food and putting in your mouth. So birds, they have beaks to get the food in their mouth. Mechanical processing happens in your mouth. So you have these different type of teeth that are going to break down food in smaller bits before it's digested chemically. Some of the birds, they don't have teeth, and what they have is gizzard, which is going to grind the food down in smaller bits before they process it. So they take these small rocks and put it in their gizzard. So digestion happens in your small intestine where you have chemicals that are breaking down the food. So when you're done and you have waste products and you need to get rid of it, that's secretion. So the reason your stool is brown and green because the pigments that come from your red blood cells. So when your red blood cells are at the end of its life, it's being broken down by your liver and spleen, and that gets dumped into your small intestine, and it gives color to your stool. So if your stool is very light in color or white in color, that means there is something wrong with your liver or spleen, and maybe they're not breaking down the dead red blood cells properly. Absorption. So water is in your intestine that gets absorbed, and most of the water gets absorbed in your large intestine. And food that you just ate. Your small intestine helps to digest it, and then you absorb the nutrients. And the hepatic portal vein takes those nutrients to your liver to process it. So your large intestine that we call colon is going to compact the stool, and it's going to store it until you're ready to excrete it. So that's the last step, excretion. So let's go ahead and do a cross-section of your GI tract. And again, GI stands for gastrointestinal tract. The inner layer of your gastrointestinal tract is made up of mucosa. So there are these three layers, mucosa, submucosa, and muscularis externa. And these are found wherever you have your digestive tract. You can say, so your esophagus, your stomach, your small intestine, your large intestine. So these three major layers, it's same throughout. So this layer, mucosa, the inner layer, it's made up of connective tissue, and then there is epithelium. And we learned that the job of epithelium is to line inside of things or to transport materials in absorption. So you have, in this case, you're trying to absorb nutrients in your digestive tract. Another thing that's there is these folds. So these folds called plicae here, and if it was your stomach, you were going to call murugae. These are going to increase the surface area, and another thing that you have there is areolar connective tissue, and also blood vessels. So blood is going to absorb the nutrients, and then the nerve endings. The nerve endings are going to tell the brain when there's food in there, so the brain can cause smooth muscle to contract and move the food along. And then when you're eating food, you're eating bacteria and some other microorganisms with it. So you have this thing called malt, and this is going to prevent pathogens from causing disease. This mucosa layer is most complicated of all three layers. You can say it's folded into a finger-like projections, and then also has villi. So those projections, these projections has villi, which is going to again increase the surface area. And then there's smooth muscle that are going to constrict and move things along, and also some elastic fibers. And underneath it, so under means sub, underneath there's another layer, it's called submucosa. So mucosa is the layer that's going to face the food, and underneath the mucosa you have a layer called submucosa. Submucosa is made up of dense, irregular connective tissue, and there's a lot of blood vessels there. There are going to be a lot of blood vessels there. Blood vessels are going to take the nutrients out of the food, so the carbs, proteins, lipids, it's all sucked out by the blood vessels, and it's going to go into your mesenteric vein, and then from there it goes to your hepatic portal system. And then also there are glands secreting buffers and enzymes, so the pH in your stomach is low. So it's a low pH there. Now, if the pH is low, once the acid goes into your intestine, it's going to burn the lining of the intestine unless it's neutralized. So there are going to be these buffers in the intestine that are going to neutralize the acid so it doesn't burn your small intestine. And there's this word called plexus, so that means a group. So there's going to be a group of nerve fibers called submucosal plexus that are going to innervate the mucosa, and the purpose is to pick up the information and tell your brain, so communication, that there's food or the chemicals needs to be released or the food needs to be moved along. And the third layer is called muscularis externa, so it's the outer layer, externa, and muscularis tells you there's a lot of muscle in there. So muscularis externa, again, is mostly muscle, and it's smooth muscle, and you guys already know that smooth muscle is under involuntary control, so you can't really control when your stomach's going to grow. So that's controlled by your brain. or the chemicals. Maybe when you smell food, your stomach starts to growl. So it's going to have two layers. It's a circular inner layer and outer layer, longitudinal. So what it's going to do, it's either going to move the food along, or it's going to mash it and break it down in smaller parts or smaller bits. And then that's controlled by a neuroplexus, so your nervous system or your brain is going to control and coordinate when that needs to happen. And one of the diseases of the digestive system that a person can get is inflammatory bowel disease. And that's a type of autoimmune disease where the digestive system gets confused and it can't really absorb any nutrients. So the person with inflammatory bowel disease is going to start losing weight, and they're going to always feel hungry. It doesn't matter how much they eat because their digestive system can't really absorb any food. Another thing that you have is you have sphincters or valves that are going to control the movement between the areas. You have sphincters throughout your GI tract, your entire GI tract. You have a sphincter on top of your esophagus. You have a sphincter on the bottom of your esophagus. These are going to control and prevent stuff from going back and forth. You have acid in your stomach, and if you eat a lot, or maybe you do a big Thanksgiving dinner, and you start to feel heartburn, and that's when your lower esophageal sphincter starts to open and the acid starts to come in the esophagus, causing that burning. Okay, so two things that you can do. You can move stuff through, and then you can another thing that you can do, you can break it down. That's called segmentation. So moving stuff through is called peristalsis, and breaking it down into smaller and smaller bits is called segmentation. So when you're chewing food, the food in your mouth turns into a ball, and that ball is called bolus. So bolus, bolus. The bolus has mucus and saliva in it, and all of that stuff together is called bolus with the food. So it's going to go down from your esophagus. It's going to be propelled down from your esophagus to your stomach. And the motion that's going to be used to propel it down is called peristalsis. So here's a animation that you can see. So this is peristalsis. And it's the smooth muscle that's going to cause it to happen. Another thing that can happen here is mechanical processing, which means the food can be broken down into smaller and smaller bits. So that's, you have two layers of muscles. You have longitudinal muscle and you have a circular muscle. So one is going to be moving it along and the other is going to be breaking it down. Because you can't really digest one big piece of food, so it needs to be broken down. So you have two layers. You have circular muscle layer and you have a longitudinal muscle. Segmentation is meshing it down before chemicals have access to it. So circular muscle is going to work together in coordination with the longitudinal muscle. So they can move, they can cause the bolus of food to move through and also to break down. So if you take your GI tract and you reverse it, you have a worm. So you have a worm. And if you look at this worm, longitudinal muscle is kind of stretching it out, and the circular muscle, they're going to hold on to the ground, and then the longitudinal muscle is going to pull it, become shorter and go forward. So that's how the worm is working. And when you reverse it, that's what you have inside your digestive tract. So you have a longitudinal muscle that's going to propel the food, it's going to move it through, and then you have your circular muscle that's going to break it down into smaller bits. And it depends on person to person, but sometimes food takes 3 to 5 hours to move along. Sometimes it takes longer. It also depends on what you eat. And your nervous system is what's going to control the speed of food, how it goes through your digestive system. So since we're talking about your digestive system, I wanted to talk a little bit about Travel's diarrhea. When someone gets diarrhea, maybe they ate something, with E. coli, that their body doesn't recognize. So in that case, the doctor is going to prescribe them Imodium, or that's the medicine that they're going to take. So what happens in diarrhea, that the food moves too quickly through, peristalsis motions, the bolus moves too quickly through the body, and it doesn't have time to absorb nutrients, so your body doesn't get time to absorb nutrients from the food. So the purpose of Imodium is to slow down the peristalsis. It's gonna slow down the bolus for you to absorb the nutrients, and it's also going to firm up the stool a little bit. So moving on, the outer covering of the GI tract is made of serosa. It's attachment point for soft ligaments, which will keep the GI tract anchored in place. So these things are going to move around. So your small intestine, large intestine, they can move around because you're not really sitting still the whole time. You can be running, you can be jumping. You're gonna need these ligaments to hold the intestines in place, and that's gonna be attached to serosa, which is this outer covering. So visceral peritoneum, which is visceral. When we use visceral word, that's the one that's touching the organ, and you're also gonna have parietal peritoneum on the outer layer. So this part, adventia, it's only present in pharynx, esophagus, and rectum. In rest, you just have serosa. So it's going to create ankle parts for the ligaments to hold them in place so they don't move around too much. And it's a little bit different. It's made up of dense fibrous connective tissue. And it says that it's going to attach digestive tract, so it's going to attach pharynx, esophagus, and rectum to nearby structures to keep them in place. Another thing I wanted to talk about, so what happens, they start moving around. So I said there's ligaments that are going to be attached to serosa to keep them in place. So what happens when they start to move around? It's called intestinal hernia. So hernia is when a part of body pushes around where it doesn't belong. So if intestines are not held in place, or there's maybe weakening of abdominal wall there's weakening of abdominal wall, intestines can push in nearby place where it doesn't belong. So maybe when someone has weak abdominal wall and they picking up something from the ground and they push in their intestines when they pick up something, and the intestine comes out, and then you can see this bulge that's called intestinal hernia, because now the intestine's in a place where it's not supposed to be. So if it's mild, maybe just a little bit comes out, it can be pushed back. Now if it's a lot of it that's been pushed out, that's going to starve itself from the blood supply, because it's not really gonna get any blood, and then there is this food in there, bacteria in there. So then a surgeon needs to go in and cut that piece out. So it's gonna cut the tube out, and then it's gonna reattach the tube. If that's not done, then sepsis can happen because you have bacteria in there, and if it enters your body, then sepsis can happen. So sometimes weakening of pelvic floor happens, especially in males, and the intestines can be pushed into the scrotum. So in that case, the surgeon needs to go in and correct it. Okay, so let's look at the histology of the digestive tract. So what we have here is called plica. It's a circular fold, plica circularis. It's in your small intestine, and sometimes students confuse these as villi. So what we have here, we have the small intestine, and then we take a part of it and we zoom in on that. So this part is called plica, and on plica, these finger-like extensions are called villi. So this is not villi, this is plica, and villi is on plica, and there's also microvilli. So microvilli is going to be on villi. So what we have here, we have plica. On plica we have villi, and on villi you can have smaller hair-like extensions, and those are going to be microvilli, and you need a microscope to look at that. You can't see it with your naked eye. And then we have the peritoneum and mesenteries. So peritoneum is abdominal cavity with the skin and this membrane, you can say. So it's the abdominal cavity and there's skin and membrane in it. It's called peritoneum. When you cut into abdominal cavity, you're cutting into peritoneum. And then there are these blood vessels attached to the intestine, sucking up all the fluid and chemicals. Those are mesenteries. So now we're going to look at oral cavity. We're going to look through the digestive system, and we're going to name the parts of it and what's happening there. What is the purpose of it? So your gums are called the gingiva. So I have highlighted some things that I need you guys to know. So gingiva are your gums. And then you have your hard palate on top, and then here you have the soft palate, and this U-shaped structure is called uvula. You also have your tonsils there. So you have your palatine. That's where your palate is, soft palate, palatine tonsil. And the opening here from your mouth to your oral pharynx, you can say, is called fauces. And then you also have your pharyngeal tonsil here, and then you have the lingual tonsil. That's where your tongue is, lingual tonsil right here. Okay, so the function of the oral cavity is to ingest solids and liquids, so ingest food. We have oral cavity. I want to say the tapeworms. If tapeworms, they don't have oral cavity. They don't have mouth. They have these suckers. They're just going to absorb the nutrients from your body. If someone has tapeworm, they are going to digest the food, and tapeworm doesn't need a mouth to, mechanically break down the food, because you already did that for the tapeworm. So it's going to absorb the nutrients through its skin from your body. You also have salivary glands that are going to add saliva to food to moisten it, and sometimes some enzymes. So the carbs, they can start breaking down in your mouth. Not a lot, just a little bit, because you have the enzymes there. You have your teeth, different types of. They can be sharp and long, or they can be the molars. We're going to cut and grind the food in your mouth, doing the mechanical processing. And you also have your taste buds, so you can taste the type of food it is. Maybe if it's nutritional, or it's sweet, or it's salty. So taste buds going to let you know the taste of the food. And they are going to release saliva and also an enzyme called amylase. Amylase is going to break down starch. Starch is something that you find in pasta and bread, so it's a complex sugar. Simple sugar would be something that you put in your coffee. So amylase is going to cut up starch into monosaccharides or simple sugars. Another thing it's going to do, saliva is going to moisten your food. Another thing, it's going to lubricate the mouth, and it's going to flush oral surfaces and control bacteria. So if you have really dry mouth, that means the bacteria is building up there, and you might have bad breath or dental cavities or dental decay. So it's really important for your health to have saliva. And the secretion of saliva is controlled by your nervous system. So if you smell really good food, your mouth starts to get watery, so your mouth starts to salivate when you smell food. And you have 3 salivary glands. Your sublingual, sub means under the tongue, lingual, submandibular, and also the parotid salivary gland. So that's there. So you have 3. Okay, so let's look at the anatomy of the tooth. So above the gums, we have crown. So gums here, gingiva, and above it we have the crown. And then there's the surface enamel. It's a really hard surface. And under it, you have the pulp cavity. So when you get those dental cavities, that means bacteria has passed through the enamel and it has gotten to the dentin, which is also a soft part, and then to the pulp cavity. So that's where you have your blood vessels and nerves. Once it's in the pulp cavity, you start getting really bad pain, and that's when you need to go and get root canal. Neck is below the crown and above the root. So this portion is called the neck. So there is an opening at the bottom of the root that's called apical foramen, and dentin, we said that's the soft part, soft layer right here. So once the bacteria enters the enamel, it's easy for it to get through the soft tissue here. Periodontal ligament is something that's going to hold the tooth in place. And we have learned that gymphosis is the joint. It's the name of the joint between the bone and the socket. Tooth is considered a bone, and it fits into a socket, and there's fibrosis connective tissue membrane that holds the teeth there, and that's another name for periodontal membrane or ligament. And when someone have pain here or they have to get a root canal, that's when the pulp cavity, so this cavity is infected, and again you have nerves there, so that's why you're getting so much pain, and the antibiotics not adequate to knock the infection out in the pulp cavity. So what they're going to do, they're going to they're going to drill a hole through the crown into the pulp cavity here, and then they're going to take a file, push the file into the root canal, and they're going to destroy all the nerves and tissues in the root canal. And they take impression of the permanent crown, and they fill the pulp cavity with nerve material. And then they're going to glue the permanent crown on top of that, and they charge a lot for that. So that's the procedure of root canal that's done when the pulp cavity is infected. Okay, so we have different types of teeth. I'm not going to ask you to memorize which one is which, but people going in dental hygiene, they might have to take a class where they ask you to memorize each teeth. So incisors are the teeth for biting and cutting food. And then the canines, these are pointy teeth next to incisors. And dogs have really prominent for this, and these are for tearing. And then there are premolars that are going to crush and mash the food and grind the food. And then there are 6 molars. So these are the ones that are really doing a lot of work. So these are going to crush and grind the food. So on this picture, you can see the canines, really pointy teeth, and then bicuspid, they have 2 cusps here. And then molars, they can be multicuspid. Here's something interesting. During development, we have 2 sets of teeth. So we have these deciduous teeth, and then we have to get rid of it, and then we grow adult teeth. And if you think about it, our other bones, so teeth is a bone, other bones like femur, they stay the same, they keep growing. Even if you break the bone, it still, it reattaches and keeps growing. And the reason for that is it has periosteum. So it has this membrane periosteum, which has osteoblast that's going to build the bone. So there is a living layer on the outside of the bone. In teeth, we don't have that, so we can't really lay down any new material, so there's no living tissue on top of baby teeth, so we have to get rid of those. Then that's called eruption, so falling out, or they're being pushed out, it's called eruption of permanent teeth. So let me show you a picture. So we have adult teeth in the mandible and maxilla. So word deciduous refers to the leaves of the trees when they fall down. So we have deciduous plants, and during fall their leaves starts to fall out. So once the teeth erupts, it's going to start growing outside of the gums. So these teeth are going to start growing outside of the gums, and there's osteoblast, periosteum and osteoblast right here, but there is none here. So these teeth are going to start erupting, and it's going to start growing out of the mandible and maxilla. And for children, there's 20 teeth, and then for adults, there are about 32. And they can sometimes grow in wrong place, and then the shape doesn't come out perfect. But these are the adult teeth that has to erupt after the deciduous teeth fall out. Okay, so we talked, when we talked about respiratory system, we talked about pharynx. We have nasopharynx near the nose, closest to the nose, and oropharynx behind mouth. Laryngopharynx, it's right here where the larynx are, where the Adam's apple is right here. Esophagus is the tube that's going to transport food to the stomach, and there are sphincters at each end. So there's a sphincter right here, and there's a sphincter where it connects to the stomach. So let's look at swallowing. So the first phase that we have here is buccal phase. So look in here, we have the hard palate, there's the tongue, there's the bolus of the food, and epiglottis, and larynx. So tongue is going to compress the food into bolus, and it's going to press against the hard palate, and the food's going to travel down, and that's voluntary. You can control your tongue. And then there's this U-shaped structure called uvula. It's going to cover up the opening to the nasal cavity, so you have your nose here, nasal cavity. It's going to kind of act like a block here, so it's going to block the opening to nasal cavity, so the food doesn't go up and it goes down. And the epiglottis, it's going to cover the trachea. It's going to cover the trachea so it doesn't So the food doesn't go down into your trachea, it's gonna go down into the esophagus. So it's covering the trachea here. Bolus is going to be pushed down. It's going to be pushed down into the esophagus, and that's going to be involuntary. So this is voluntary and this is involuntary. And upper esophageal sphincter, it's going to open. So there's a sphincter right here, and the food's going to go down. And again, you have a circular and longitudinal layer of the muscles, and using peristalsis motions, it's going to be pushed down. And then you also have another sphincter. So the esophagus here is going down and it comes down here and it's gonna go through the diaphragm muscle and into the stomach. And there's another sphincter right here, and that's called lower esophageal sphincter. That's going to open and the food is going to be pushed down and it's going to enter your stomach. And you can see these folds in your stomach. These folds are called rugae. So just to give you a summary of the process, esophagus is going to carry food from laryngopharynx to stomach. It's going to connect lower part of your throat with your stomach. And bolus of the food moves down from esophagus with peristalsis contractions, and our body doesn't really rely upon gravity for that. You could be laying down and you could put water in your mouth and you would still swallow. Again, you start with mastication. You're going to be using your chewing muscles in your tongue, and another muscle is buccinator that's going to manipulate the food, and the salivary gland is going to release saliva and mucus, and that's going to go and moisten the food. And it's going to turn into bolus. And bolus of the food, it's a round structure. It's going to hit back of your throat and the body takes over. So your tongue pushing it. So your tongue pushing it is voluntary, and once the body takes over, it's involuntary. The uvula blocks the water and the food going in your nose. So that's why if you're talking when you're eating, sometimes water goes in your nose. It comes out through your nose. And there are many muscles that are going to elevate the larynx and the hyoid bones. So two of them that you guys learned are digastric and mylohyoid. And the food comes down, passing through the upper esophageal sphincter and goes down to your stomach, passing through the lower esophageal sphincter. And it's gonna go into the stomach, and then the stomach is going to mesh up the food and release the chemicals that need to be released to break the food down further. And that's going to be involuntary. You can't really control that or manually think about it. Another thing I want to mention is that in some animals like cow and giraffe, they're eating a lot of vegetable matter, and that matter they cannot really digest. It's the microorganisms that are going to break down that vegetable matter for them. So you might notice that they're chewing. So cow maybe sitting down and chewing for a long time, maybe on grass or some other vegetable matter. So it's gonna go down after they're done chewing. It's gonna go down in one of the compartments of their stomach. Microorganisms, they're going to break it down, and then maybe not all the way, and then the cow might be like, well, let me give it a little bit more help. So the food goes back up and they're going to chew it more and send it back down to their compartment of their stomach. So I don't know if you guys heard about cows having multiple stomachs. So they don't really have multiple stomachs. They have different compartments in their stomach. So in those animals, the food can go back up. In us, it just goes down one way, and unless you're maybe vomiting. And then I think I said this before too. So the esophagus, this is the histology cross-section of esophagus, and you can see the lumen inside opening is called the lumen inside, and it's kind of folded on itself, and the food is going to push it open. So it doesn't stay open, the food can push it open. It's going to have different layers. So you have the stratified squamous epithelium there. And the reason for that is when you're eating food that can damage this epithelium, it can damage these cells. And stratified means 2 or more layers of the cells. And we have stratified there because these cells, they're able to divide fairly quickly. So they're lining up the esophagus, and if they get damaged, they can divide pretty quickly, and you're gonna have more of those cells. So this term sphincter, we heard it before. So it's a thick muscular rings that are going to separate some of the organs. So these are going to control the movement of things in and out of the tube. So what enters the stomach and what leaves the stomach. So in this picture, you can see this stomach, this sphincter right here. That's the lower esophageal sphincter. Food's going to come down through esophagus, going to enter the stomach once this esophageal sphincter opens. After it's in the stomach, once it leaves the stomach, this sphincter is going to open, pyloric sphincter. So the sphincter is going to control what comes in and out of the tube. And the tube is your GI tract. You guys have to know the different parts of the stomach. So you have the fundus on top, body in middle, and then you have the pylorus. This part is called pylorus, and that's why the sphincter that's right here is called pyloric sphincter. This is magnification on the stomach. So there's this lower esophageal sphincter. So sometimes what can happen is the weakening of the sphincter can happen, and in that case the food from the stomach, because you have low pH in your stomach, so you have acid in there, so the acid from the stomach can go up there. Once that sphincter weakens, it can open and the acid can travel up in the esophagus. Once that happens, it's going to cause burning, and that's called heartburn or burning sensation in the chest. So that's the acid reflux. That's the term that we use. So it's the acid reflux, and that's when this acid from the stomach starts to go up in the esophagus. So stomach is the muscular sac that's going to store or hold food, and it does a very little digestion and absorption. Once the food is inside the stomach, we don't call it bolus anymore. So in the stomach, the food starts to mix with other chemicals that are being released from the stomach, and it's going to be called chyme. So sometimes malformation of the pyloric sphincter can happen in children, and it's congenital, means they are born with it. So when that happens, that's called thickening of the pyloric sphincter. That's thickening of the pyloric sphincter. So that's called a pyloric stenosis or constriction. So that's when the passageway is narrowed. So it's babies, they can burp up baby milk, and a little bit is normal, but when they start burping up all of it, that's because it's not going in the small intestine. It's maybe stopping here, and it starts to come up, and that's because the baby is going to start losing weight, and he's gonna become very inactive. So the procedure, they're gonna have to do a surgical procedure. They're going to dilate the portion of the stomach that's narrowed. So they're going to go in and maybe cut a little bit of the pyloric sphincter, smooth muscle here, to open it up. So once that happens, the baby can gain weight and the food starts to pass through. So on this picture, what you can see these ulcers that are caused by H. pylori, so Helicobacter pylori bacteria. Ulcer is where tissues are broken down to the point that it starts to bleed. So before, they didn't really know what was causing it, so they would tell you, oh, don't eat spicy food, or they would give them antacid, or they would tell them don't eat spicy food, because they didn't really know what was causing it. And then this guy came, a microbiologist, he came and he did some research. His name is Barry Marshall. So he did some research, and he said, oh, I don't think that this is caused by spicy foods. He said it's caused by an actual bacteria. So the way you can test this on people, if you want to test it on real people, it's a long procedure. You have to get a lot of approvals, has to go through FDA. But he took the shortcut, and he tested this on himself. So he took photos of his stomach. So he went to his doctor, asked him to take photos of his stomach with no ulcers, and he had no ulcers. So that was his control. And then he took this broth of this H. pylori bacteria and he drank it. And after a few days, he started developing symptoms. And then he went back to his doctor and asked him to take pictures, and this time he had ulcers. So he proved that these ulcers are caused by H. pylori. He proved that, but now he had ulcers. So since it's a bacteria that's causing it, what you can do, you can take a course of antibiotics, and that's gonna take care of it. And versus virus, it's gonna be a lot difficult. So since this was bacteria, he took some antibiotics, and then he was fine. So going back, this picture is showing you the stomach. So this is what stomach looks like under the microscope. So you're gonna have the gastric pit. So whenever you take a cross section of the stomach, look at it under the microscope, you're gonna have these gastric pits. And then you're also gonna see this simple columnar epithelium that's gonna have water or mucus in it. Okay, so in your stomach, you have these different type of cells that are going to release HCLs, the acid and the protein digestive enzymes in the gastric pit. So this is where the enzymes are being released. So you also have these nerves coming to your stomach, and these are the nerves that are going to tell your brain when you're full. So it can start releasing those enzymes, and it can start contracting the smooth muscle. So if someone is trying to lose weight, what they can do, they can drink 2 glasses of water before they eat, before they have their actual meal. So they can do that. That's going to stretch out these muscles in the stomach, and when you actually start eating, maybe you eat really fast because you're really hungry. Since your stomach muscles are already stretched out, you won't eat as fast and you won't overeat. And maybe you will eat even less. So that's something that people try when they're trying to lose weight. So it's regulated by nervous system and some hormones from the small intestine. So on this picture, you can see the folds that are found in the stomach wall, and then also the gastric pits, and these are where the enzymes are being released. In physiology, you will do an experiment where they give you different types of food, lipids, carbs, or proteins, and they're trying to see which chemical is being released when you're trying to digest the lipids versus maybe carbohydrates. So hydrochloric acid in the stomach, it's going to kill most of the bacteria in our food. We said that there is this simple columnar epithelium in the stomach wall, and there's also some goblet cells. Those are going to create that gooey mucus, and that's going to create a shielding around the stomach so the acid doesn't hurt the stomach wall. Our hydrochloric acid also going to activate this enzyme called pepsinogen and to pepsin. So pepsinogen is when it's inactive and pepsin is when it's active, and that's going to break down the foods further. So since the stomach is part of the GI tract, there is a smooth muscle, circular and longitudinal here, again doing the meshing up and the mixing, and then moving the food down to small intestine. So think about maybe washing machine where it has to move for the detergent to come in contact with your laundry. So here the stomach, the smooth muscle in your stomach is moving the food so the chemicals can come in contact with the food. Inside the stomach, you're gonna have these folds, and these are called rugae. So these are wrinkles. So these are going to increase the surface area for the chemicals to be secreted. And you have these 2 layers, longitudinal and circular layer there. Again, the top part is called the fundus body, and then you have the pylorus of the stomach, and then the pyloric sphincter, and this is where the small intestine starts, and the first part of the small intestine is called the duodenum. So on this picture, I want you to notice the omentum, which is this tissue with the adipose. So when you cut into abdominal cavity, you cut through this omentum, and then you get to the mesenteries where you have your arteries and the veins that are connected to your intestines, and they absorb the water and the nutrients and the chemicals there. The diameter of the small intestine is smaller compared to the large intestine, so that's why it's called small intestine. It's much longer in length compared to the large intestine. It has 3 parts: duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. These are different lengths. So duodenum is about 10 inches long, and jejunum is 8 feet, and ileum is 12 feet. It's difficult to tell where one ends and the next one starts, so I don't really expect you guys to know these numbers. But total, it ranges from 15 to 20 feet long. And if someone gets tapeworms, that's where they live in the small intestine. And this is the adult tapeworm, can be up to 25 feet long, and they're really well adapted. They don't even have a mouth, they're going to observe the food and the nutrients through their body, because you're already digesting the food for them. You're already breaking it down, so they can just absorb the nutrients through their skin. So I wanted to show you a video of the tapeworm I found.
15.
You're not going to anesthetize her?
Relax. It's just a magic trick. She's faking it. We're not falling for it this time. Okay, keep that retracted. Four sevens.
Lake fishing can be fun. It can bring the generations together. If you don't cook that trout or perch well, you'll be giving room and board to this fella. By free board, I mean all B12 you could take in.
I could have a tapeworm in me.
Not likely. You'd be in a lot of pain. It's gotta be 25 feet long.
Damn it.
So it can be up to 25 feet long. Major functions of the small intestine is digestion. So most of the digestion happens in small intestine, and part of the absorption also takes place here. The esophagus is transporting the bolus from the mouth to the stomach, and then the acid in the stomach is going to sterilize the food. It's going to kill any bacteria that's there, and then it's going to be moved into the small intestine. So in the small intestine, you have these folds called plica circularis, circular folds of mucosa. So on here, this whole thing would be plica circularis, and if you zoom in on that, so it's zooming in on the part of it, that's the villi. So you also have villi, those are finger-like projections, and on the villi, if you zoom in on there, you have the microvilli there. So those are the hair-like structures there. It's a cross-section of the intestinal wall, so you have these three layers: mucosa, submucosa, and muscularis externa. So a lot of muscles, a lot of smooth muscle in the muscularis externa, and serosa is where the ligaments are attaching it to the abdominal wall. And then you have the villi, and when you zoom in on villi, you're going to have microvilli. Small intestine is connected to two organs that are going to dump the chemicals into it. So one is pancreas and the other one is gallbladder. Gallbladder is going to put bile in small intestine, and the part it's going to put bile in is called duodenum. Pancreas is going to put in digestive enzymes and alkaline buffer. So we learned that your stomach has low pH, and so the acids can enter the small intestine, can damage the small intestine, but there is this alkaline buffer that's being released by pancreas that's going to neutralize the acid that's going into the small intestine, so you don't damage the small intestine. So bile is made by liver and is stored in the gallbladder. So here we have the right and left hepatic ducts of the liver. So these are coming from the liver, and these can bring the bile down here to duodenum, or it can store it in the gallbladder. So the duct that's taking the bile from the gallbladder is called cystic duct, and it's forming this Y shape. So you have the common hepatic duct. Hepatic means liver, and it's common because right and left are combining here. So common hepatic duct, and then you have the cystic duct here. So you go down. You have the bile duct, so it's going to bring the bile down to duodenum, and you also have a sphincter here, so this is going to control the amount of bile. And here you have the pancreatic duct, and there's another sphincter that's called pancreatic sphincter that's going to control the amount of pancreatic juices that go into the duodenum. And then there is another sphincter that's called hepato. Hepato means liver, pancreatic, pancreas, sphincter. So here you can see that the shape of it, that's why it's called ampulla. So hepatopancreatic ampulla there. This green is coming from the gallbladder. It's bringing the bile to the duodenum, and pancreatic duct is going to bring pancreatic juices from the pancreas. So once chyme moves into small intestine, digestion takes place there and some absorption, and then it can move to the large intestine. End of the small intestine is called ileum. That part is going to attach to the large intestine. So you're gonna have a worksheet there. You have to fill in different parts. It's gonna ask the regions of the large intestine. So I'm not asking the regions like epigastric or hypochondriac regions. I'm asking you to label ascending colon, transverse, and descending colon. So cecum is like a pouch, and it's going to connect small intestine to the large intestine. And this is the widest in diameter. And this is also where the appendix comes out, and appendix can have your macrophages and your blood cells in there that are going to be part of your lymphatic system, that are going to take care of any infections that can happen. So the one that goes up is called ascending colon, across transverse, and down descending, and then it turns into this S shape. That's called sigmoid colon, and then out through the rectum. The length for the large intestine is about 5 feet, and it has 3 parts. So cecum is pouch-like. This is going to be the widest part there. And then the colon is the largest part. So you have 3, ascending, transverse, and descending, and sigmoid, actually 4. And then the rectum is the end of the digestive tract. So the large part, rectum, it's going to store the stool before defecation. And anything that your body wants to reclaim, any water or calcium, any electrolytes, and that's where it's going to happen in the large intestine. So any absorption happens here. Also the compaction of the stool here, so drying it out until you're ready to go, and also the absorption of any vitamins that your body wants to reclaim before it's excreted out. So the storage of the stool happens here as well. This is the cross-section of the large intestine, and if you look at it, it's very similar to the stomach. It's flat and it has no villi. And there are 3 layers: mucosa, submucosa, and muscularis externa, and then there's outer layer called serosa. So this is the small intestine. In small intestine, you're going to have plica, you're going to have villi, and then microvilli. So let's compare these 3. So we have stomach and small intestine and large intestine. So if you look at this, stomach looks very similar to large intestine, and then small intestine, you can tell the difference between these. So on the exam, what I usually ask, I ask you to compare stomach and the small intestine. I never really ask the large intestine because this looks very similar to the stomach. So don't worry about large intestine histology too much. So when the food goes in, what turns it into chyme, or how the fats get emulsified, or how the fats are going to get broken down in your body. So there are these accessory glands, salivary glands, liver, gallbladder, and pancreas, that are going to be releasing different types of juices to break down the food. So first one we have is your liver. This is the largest organ, and if someone has fatty liver disease, they're gonna have really big liver with a lot of adipose in it. So the liver is broken down into lobes. One thing that I wanted to tell you about this, that people can donate one of their lobes. So if they're donating one of their lobes, and maybe an adult is donating to the baby, the lobe can sometimes take up most of their abdominal cavity. So you have different lobes. You have right and left lobe, and then you have quadrate, and then the caudate lobe. So you have 4 lobes there, and then you have the hepatic portal vein that's going to take the nutrients from the small intestine to the liver to process it, and hepatic artery that's taking the oxygenated blood to the liver. And then you also have ligaments. You have falciform ligament there, and then you have the round ligament, and then you have the coronary ligament. You'll be learning to name these for the lab part of the class. So the functions of the liver, you're going to learn that it's going to work with a lot of other organs. So you drink alcohol, it's going to break down the enzymes. And another one is the hematological regulation. Hemato refers to your blood. So once it's end of your red blood cell life cycle, it's going to be broken down by the liver, and it's going to be recycled by the liver. When the liver is not working properly, people get jaundice or yellowing of their skin and the eyes. So another one would be secretion and synthesis of bile. So it's going to make the bile. It can get stored in the gallbladder and then sent out to duodenum for digestion. This is a histology of the liver, so cross-section of the liver. When you do a cross-section, this is what you see. So you see the hepatocytes. Hepato means liver and cytes means cells. So you have these hepatocytes inside the liver. So this is a review how the bile is getting where it needs to go. So sphincter is closed, bile enters cystic duct. So you have your liver here, and you have your common hepatic duct. So you have left and right hepatic duct that come together, make the common hepatic duct. Cystic duct is coming from the gallbladder, so the bile is being made by the liver. It can go to the gallbladder and can be stored there, or it can go down and it can go into the duodenum, where you have the bile duct and the pancreatic duct from the pancreas coming to the duodenum, and you have the hepatopancreatic sphincter here that's going to be controlling the entry of the bile and the pancreatic juices into the duodenum. So sometimes what people do, sometimes they get an infection of the gallbladder. So in that case, they're going to do a surgery. They're going to put a camera in there, or maybe some tools, and they're going to remove the gallbladder. So those people, they are, so the purpose of the gallbladder is to store bile, and the bile is going to emulsify the fat. So those people who don't have gallbladder, their liver is still making bile, so they can still eat fatty foods, but not in large amounts. So they have to be very mindful how much fat they eat, because if they eat too much fat, they don't have bile stored to break down the fat, so they're gonna get an upset stomach. So there's some water in the bile that can be observed. And there is this hormone that's going to cause the sphincter to relax, the hepatopancreatic sphincter, and that's going to start ejecting the bile into duodenum. I don't expect you guys to know the name of the hormone, so don't worry about the name. So on this picture, you can see you have the fat globule, and then once the bile gets into, or bile comes in contact with the fat globule, it's going to start making it into smaller pieces. So think about if you have grease on your hands, if you just wash it with water, it's not going to come off. You're going to need soap for it. So this bile works like soap. It's going to get in between these fat globules, and it's going to start making it smaller and smaller. So it's going to emulsify the fats. So if you're cooking, sometimes you have to add this emulsifier. If you're cooking with butter, you have to add the emulsifier to break it down. So I said earlier the pancreas is both exocrine and endocrine gland. So there are two types of cells. So pancreatic acini, they're going to secrete digestive enzymes and alkaline buffer to neutralize the acids. So that's the exocrine part of the pancreas. So your digestive system is considered the outside world. This is going to secrete digestive enzymes into the digestive system, or the duodenum. And the pancreatic islets, these are going to produce hormones, and they're going to, so this pancreatic islets are considered endocrine part of the pancreas, because these hormones are going to the blood. And again, pancreatic juices are secreted and stimulated by hormones, and this is the hormone. Again, you don't have to know the name. So let's look at this picture. I'm gonna have a zoom in version of that. And this is what your pancreas looks like, kind of fits inside your small intestine like that, and stomach. So pancreatic acini are the cells that are outlined here. So these are going to be exocrine part of the pancreas, so produce digestive enzymes and ions. And pancreatic islets, they're going to produce the hormones. So you have the islets of Langerhans or pancreatic islets. So you have two names there. This is the old name, I believe. This is the cartoon version. S and R cells for the acini cells. They are the exocrine, and the pancreatic islets are the endocrine function of the pancreas. Here's another picture. So that's it for the digestive system.